Okay. The easiest way to begin is to talk about the helpers, what their intention and goal is. That will help us be on the same page as the helpers when it comes to recognizing and understanding their communication style. One of the main things that's so important is that they're companions. They're not anything like our parents or an authority figure or someone who is trying to commandeer or take charge of our lives. They're companions. And when we can really grasp that they're companions who are helping us walk our best path on earth, helping us navigate the most fulfilling life walk in harmony with the highest good, then that helps us really embrace and grasp what their communication style is. Since they are ambassadors of spirit, that means they demonstrate characteristics and qualities of the living spirit, which means they're never going to ridicule us, mock us, disparage us, or anything like that. They're supportive, understanding, sometimes fairly firm if we're about to make a decision that isn't very good for us. But if we can understand that they're ambassadors of the living spirit, they're not us, they're not our own projections or our own imaginations. They're independent beings who are in service to the highest light, and their way of being of service is to help us on our earth walk. And that's one of the things that I hear often from folks is that the companionship of the helpers, the warm friendship of the helpers is so unexpected. We often have a tendency to look at the helpers with some awe and reverence, kind of holding them at arm's length, when their communication style really is one of warmth and friendship and support and caring, and also good wisdom givers. So respect and honor is never out of line. But awe and reverence tends to put us on way different pages than the helpers are on, and often it's very difficult then to understand and really be in sync with the communication style of the helpers. The affection of the helpers also is something that tends to surprise people. It did me, especially if we have a power animal helper. Bear, for example, might just warmly embrace us and nuzzle us, and that's incredibly healing and nourishing, especially if we're going through a difficult time. Or a mountain lion or cougar might give us this nice warm lick on the cheek in vision, in journey space, and too much awe and reverence, we could really miss that piece. And the helpers really aren't all that interested in being separate from us in that kind of an artificial way. They really want to help us in a way where there's a warm bond and a deep friendship and a companionship with all of the support and the understanding, and particularly helping us as we're going through rough times. So that's really an important part of the way that the helpers communicate with us is warm friendship. And remember that if you are experiencing something in vision or in journey space where there's disparagement going on, or we're feeling ridiculed in some fashion, or somehow we're having an experience where it seems like a helper is looking down on us, either that's not a helper, it's our own projection, or sometimes the helpers will mirror and demonstrate to us something that, like we might be doing that to ourselves. We might be disparaging ourselves, and the helpers might be demonstrating that. Or there might be an occasion when we're having that kind of an experience from a helper where we feel really criticized and put down. And if that's truly our helper, and hopefully we know our helper well enough by that time we have a good, warm bond with them established. If that's truly our helper, then probably what they're demonstrating is something like we might have a friendship with someone. And maybe it's someone that we've known since childhood, but they tend to have a cutting tongue. And maybe we haven't been aware that within that relationship there's something that makes us feel small, and the helpers may be demonstrating to us this particular piece that we're overlooking, that somehow within that relationship or that friendship, it's not really healthy for us. So as far as I can recall, that is probably the only time that a person might experience the helpers doing something that feels demeaning or criticizing or disparaging is when they're demonstrating something to us. But other than that, I can't ever recall a time when the helpers have ever headed in that direction. That's just not their communication style. Sometimes they can be pretty firm. just simply because of their caring for us. If we're starting to go off in the weeds and looking at making a decision that's really very poor, sometimes out of that compassion and caring, they can hold a fairly firm demeanor, but not disparaging and not critiquing. That's probably one of the things to try to keep reminding ourselves when we're interacting with the helpers, is that the helper's style is not anything that we're familiar with on the earth walk in the earth realm. There's few, if any, human beings that have this style about them. And we're so accustomed to the way that we interact with human beings that inadvertently we can project that onto the helpers, and then we can miss a lot as far as both developing that warm and rich bond with the helpers that's really going to stand us in good stead as life goes on. Or we're going to miss something that's really important for our life walk, some nourishing, some healing, some support, and some clarity that's really going to make a difference for us. So getting to learn the helper's communication style has a lot to do with getting to learn who the helpers are. Ambassadors of the highest light, supportive, understanding, tremendous amount of wisdom and care, and the intention is to help us navigate and navigate well, and never to boss us around, commandeer our lives, or override our free will in any way. And there are some things to remember about that, which is that being neutral when we approach the helpers in journey space matters a lot more. If we go to a neighbor or a friend and we ask for some input about something, generally speaking, they'll have a pretty strong opinion. Very often we'll experience from other people that they'll try to persuade us and convince us, where because the helpers hold much more of the demeanor of being in service, rather than attempting to manhandle us, making sure that we're examining ourselves, that we really focus on being neutral, because the helpers are not going to push or force their wisdom on us. So being neutral is one of those rather important things, just simply because the helper's communication style rarely is even honestly persuasive. They will offer us a full picture, a perspective. They will make recommendations, but it doesn't have the same flavor as often when we're going to people in the human being realm for counsel or feedback. So that's one of the things to remember about the helper's communication style, is that being neutral really matters. It matters probably more than almost anything else when we're dealing with difficult issues that are driving us a little crazy, or issues that we're frustrated about. Take the time to try to approach the helpers being open and receptive to what the helpers wish to share, because otherwise, if our own stuff is in the mix too strongly, the helpers aren't going to impose their counsel or their wisdom or be overbearing. I have a friend here, for those who didn't hear us talking earlier. She's a warm friend and a colleague, and her name is Deb Matlock. She's a long-time journeyer, and I've asked her if she would share some observations from her own personal experience with the helpers about some of the things that she's noticed about the communication style, or some things maybe that have even surprised her. I want to just make a quick comment. Deb has a real gift for shamanic animal communication, and she's the one that I go to if I need some help with my four-legged companion. So just a quick mention that if anyone is ever seeking a shamanic animal communicator, that Deb is really gifted in that arena. And if you ever would like to get in touch with her, just send me an email and I'll send you her contact information. So, Deb?
I am here. Hi, everybody. I'm Deb, and I live in Colorado, about an hour or so from Chris. And I'm really excited about this topic and happy to share, and want to say first that working with Chris for the years that I have has really helped me to solidify my relationship with my helpers and be able to move into a place where it feels very co-creative and like a partnership. And I think that was one of the things my helpers started sharing with me early on, was that this is a partnership, that this is about working cooperatively, not about them telling me what to do or about me guiding every journey and saying, this is what I want to journey about tonight. And if it's not that, then forget it, because a lot of times they would take my journeys in places that I would never have expected them to go, but truly the places that they needed to go.
That really underlines why I use the term an invitation rather than an intention when we journey. That's evolved over time where the helpers have recommended that. Really like what you shared, a cooperation. That's why invitation. And so for those of you who are trying to journey or are fairly new at journeys, that's what I would recommend, is that maybe move away from the idea of having an intention and more into the idea of an invitation.
Yeah, that's actually a really beautiful way to think about it, and that actually plays perfectly into one of the surprises I had when I started working with my helpers, which is that they really wanted to develop a relationship and a friendship very similar to having a neighbor. And one of the metaphors that has come to my mind over the years with this is if I had a neighbor who just moved in, I wouldn't start my interaction with that person by asking for things and demanding things or revering them inappropriately or anything like that. I'd probably start the relationship by saying, hey, would you like to come over for dinner? And then just get to know each other, hang out together. And I spent a lot of time when I was first starting to journey consciously and really wanted to learn, kind of just hanging out with my helpers, going into journey space, just being completely open to whatever it was we were going to do. Sometimes it was really profound. Other times we would do things that just allowed me to feel more comfortable with my helpers, with the journey space, and sort of learn the communication style, if you will, which I know is tonight's topic, of how the different helpers function. And that was probably one of my big surprises. Another surprise that I continue to be surprised by, which is part of what's so amazing about shamanic journey work, is that every helper is different. Some of the helpers I've worked with have been very talkative, very open, maybe I would say extroverted if I was speaking in personality terms. Others haven't said a word and have just been guides to show things or bring feelings or mirror things, and then kind of everything in between. So that's another piece of it that I think is really an important component that I've learned, is that I never know what to expect, and it doesn't mean that one way is better than another. Some journeys with certain helpers are very audible, whereas others may have very little language and be feelings and images, and I think it's just sort of a rich tapestry, just like with all the people and animals and plants and trees that we know. It's very varied.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be confusing to people, 2 or 3 helpers engaging in a journey, and one will step forward with a particular kind of demeanor and then step into the background, and another will step forward with a teaching or some kind of metaphor and then step back into the background, and another might take the reins as far as going into a different vision entirely and then step into the background. That's another thing. The communication style of the helpers usually is who's most appropriate for whatever is most needed at this time. And if a person is familiar with more than one helper, they will step forward with the right kind of energy that's needed for that shift in the journey or a particular healing or teaching. Deb, does that happen to you?
Yeah, and actually, as I was listening to you talk, it made me think that some helpers, I think, show up, at least in my experience, just for certain things. For example, I have an academic part of my life, and I have one specific helper who only shows up and helps me with work around my research project, and he has never, to this date anyways, come for any other reason. I have one helper that helps a lot when I do animal sessions and tends to be the one that comes for that. And then the other thing I've noticed is helpers come for a certain time period in some cases, and then maybe whatever it is that's going on that I'm working with that helper, and then that helper sort of fades away. And that part is a little painful sometimes because the relationship is built, and then it's sort of, wow, wait a minute, why are you leaving?
Yeah. I was just reassuring another person, her primary helper was stepping back to allow an introduction to another helper. And, in the human being realm, there is that sense of loss, but for whatever phase or time we're going through, whatever they're bringing in the mix isn't that much of a priority. And if another helper is going to provide the best demeanor and energy for a situation, then another helper will step forward. And sometimes it'll happen in a single journey. And one of the reasons that matters is that sometimes we can get so focused on a particular helper who has been our primary interactive helper, we're not being aware that there are some helpers in the background. The time is right for them to step forward and engage us, and our primary helper is not responding, and we might miss the signals that they're really wanting to bring forward another helper to address whatever is going on right now. You know, I was really tickled when one helper who, gosh, he must have stopped being my primary helper 7-8 years ago, and then suddenly he started stepping in again, and it was like greeting an old friend.
I can relate to that as well. It was almost 2 years, and one helper, he just showed up in the journey and kind of just waved, didn't really contribute a whole lot. But it was, like you just mentioned, it was just really cool and heartwarming.
Yeah. I think that what you mentioned, Deb, this companionship piece, the warm friendship piece, is probably the hardest one for new journeyers anyway, and even those who have had some real seasoning and experience to really grasp. Can you remember a particular time when you began to really become aware of that, and where your mindset was before and after? Is there any particular experience that you can recall?
I think for me, it was when I shifted from being afraid of my journeys and being afraid that I was making this up and being afraid that this wasn't real. And when I started moving through the voices, family, culture, internal self, all those things that I was really struggling with, to the other side and going, wow, this is amazing. I've had enough journeys now where I'm seeing the effects of this on Earth. I'm starting to see that this blends with my Earth life perfectly. And I started to relax a little bit and be more open. And then I found that the next step after that was even sometimes joking a little bit. If something I would journey about it, and then something would be happening in the Earth realm the next few days, I found myself, without even thinking about it, saying out loud to my helpers, "Are you serious? This? You know, or whatever it was." And I just sort of found the relationship moving in a natural way, much like, honestly, meeting new people, where you start out and you're learning. And then all of a sudden you're comfortable, so you start to feel more relaxed. And, you know, it just started to feel more like a normal relationship. But I think the big shift in my headspace was when I had to stop freaking myself out.
That this might be all imagination.
Or that I was crazy and that somehow this is something that I shouldn't talk about, and, you know, this is what happens when, you know, people are losing their minds or something like that. Mm-hmm. That was a tough piece for me.
Yeah. One of the ways of really getting well acquainted with our helpers is sharing humor. Mm-hmm. And if we are closed to that in some way, we're going to be missing something. The helpers, they have an incredible sense of humor. I don't know how often the helpers joke with you, Deb, but they will often with me when I'm way too uptight and way too serious about something, as well as just revitalizing that warm connection. And if we're not experiencing just the lightheartedness and of the helpers, then we're kind of missing the warmth and the companionship there as well. Some people think that they are a little out of their minds when their helpers are just laughing, playing, having fun, joking with them. But their play on words sometimes is pretty stunning. You know, Jerry, has this sparked anything for you? Why don't you press 5*?
Yes, can you hear me, Chris?
Very good.
But, you know, actually what Deb was saying sparked a response for me that I think would help. And that is just as a precursor. You know, I've worked with Chris for about 6 years. And for my process, what helped create a shift was seeing that the proof was in the pudding. When I began working with Chris, it was a life shift that was asked of me from the get-go, or from nearly the get-go, to change a trajectory. And that was a hard thing to initially open up to, but I did over time because I saw the worth in it. So over a period of several years, I followed this trajectory and let it develop, And particularly in retrospect, I can look back and really see how that was the better choice compared to where I was going. So over time, I think it's been a series of seeing how the guidance will manifest and how it's very useful, even for the things we might not fully appreciate at the moment. But then later on, or after the situation has happened, we can look back and say, oh, wow, I'm really glad that I went that way and not the other, or that I had that perspective and not the other.
Yeah. Makes all the difference, doesn't it? Thank you. Okay. Deb, is there anything else that you'd like to share?
I think just the one thing is spending the time and dedicating the commitment to developing the relationship with my helpers, I think is probably one of the single most important things I've ever done. And my entire life is better for it and different because of it. And I look back and think of the fear and the apprehension and all of the insecurities I had around it when I was starting, and I'm so grateful that I just kept with it and just let it happen, because I really, truly, honestly can't fathom life without it now. And so it's worth the stumbling and the weird feelings and all the stuff. It's just so worth it.
Yeah. You know, you're going to hang around for a while, aren't you, Deb?
Yes,
because there's one piece here talking about reviewing and reflecting and how important that is. And I remember when the helpers counseled you to record all of your journeys and then do a transcript.
Yes.
And when we head into that, I wonder if maybe you might share a little bit about what a difference that made.
Absolutely. Yep, okay. I'll be here. Just holler whenever you'd like.
Okay, great. Okay. Since we talked about the metaphors that the helpers will sometimes use, hearing, sensing, seeing, and when they're demonstrating or mirroring something to us, as opposed to having an actual experience being crafted for us, that's sometimes a little difficult. But this really frees up the helpers if we can get comfortable with this piece. If the helpers are doing something that seems very odd, strange, maybe we're seeing a vision of the helpers with a metal pipe hitting us over the head. If we're seeing something that we know is not the helper's communication style, it's not their way, we can observe a little bit and ask why we're seeing this. And I prefer not to use the word personally, tell me what that's all about, or explain this, please, but rather what's the significance, because that offers them a little more leeway to be able to explain or describe it to us. So if we're seeing a vision where the helpers are doing something that we know is out of character for the helpers, it's not their spiritual culture, it's not their way, it's not a way that we just know that ambassadors of the living spirit would be acting. If we can loosen the reins a little bit and allow them to demonstrate some things to us without our freaking out, then that gives them a whole another range of another way of being able to communicate some things to us through vision or sensation or something that really makes the point. So sometimes if we're seeing something that is out of character for the helpers, then we might ask, what is the significance of this? And they may offer us another vision that just helps. It's like a mosaic. It comes at it from another angle, and then it helps flesh it out a little bit. And then if we're still not sure what the significance is of what we're seeing, we'd just ask again. And they may show us 4 or 5 different visions of things that may not seem to have anything to do with each other, but they all kind of combine to give us a clear picture of something. So let's take the example that we might be seeing a vision of the helpers hitting us over the head with a steel pipe. And if we don't wig out, because we know that's not the helper's style, that's not the way that they address us or communicate with us, if we can stand back a little bit and go, I wonder what they're demonstrating, and then ask the significance, we might discover that they're really trying to emphasize that we're disparaging ourselves way too much about what might be just a real minor issue. Or, again, like I said before, they might be trying to demonstrate something to us where we might have a friendship or a relationship with someone, and their verbal tendency is to disparage us, and they're trying to highlight for us that this is really not healthy for us. And sometimes when we're going through a healing, the helpers might offer us a vision of something and an experience where we might be flaking off our skin, which in the physical realm would be pretty distressing. But it's a fantastic metaphor for shedding our skin and being able to step out from maybe an artificial way of being into a more authentic way of being. So that's one of the things that if we can remember that when we see visions or have experiences that in the physical realm would seem to be pretty distressing if that were actually happening physically, if we can remember that the helpers will craft visions or experiences for us that really help demonstrate a real clear point to us without getting tangled up in the stuff of the vision itself. If we can get to the place where we're acknowledging the vision or the experience as being a real dramatic explanation for a dynamic that's occurring for us and stay away from transposing it into what that might be like in the physical realm, then that really allows the helpers to be at their creative best. And what I have found is that the helpers will provide a vision for someone, but they get kind of wigged out about it because in the physical realm it would be interesting. If a person gets wigged out at the metaphors being used and isn't being helped by it, then the helpers won't utilize that communication style because they don't want to distress us. But obviously, that's a real lovely way that the helpers can demonstrate something to us as long as we don't get hung up on the creative way that metaphors are crafted and used for us. Really encourage people to be very open. I know that it took me at least several years to get the hang of that, and once I was very open to it, the helper's ability to quickly get a point across to me really increased. Why don't we go ahead and talk about that piece that I talked about earlier about how important reflection and review is. It's really important, far more than I ever thought. And the helpers seem to have never let up on how important that is. That taking notes and reflecting on the wisdom and guidance that's been shared, or even reviewing and embracing a healing and deepening a healing that we've experienced, to some degree that's honor and respect and valuing what's been shared, and that's really important. It also has another aspect, which is that if we can integrate and embrace and apply what's been shared, then we're going to grow much faster or heal much more deeply. There are some things that will come up in journeys that we're just going to tend to forget. And that's why there's a recommendation to, if you're journeying solo, take the time to write down your notes from the journey. Start anywhere that you remember and just scribble all over the place. And just write down everything that you can recall from the journey before you get busy with anything else, because it's kind of like a dream. Even if you were to just go get a drink of water, at least if you're new to journeying, certainly, you can lose whole pockets of the journey experience just by shifting gears for that moment. And as we talk about this a little more, one of the things that I often will recommend is that before a journey completes and you're out of connection with the helpers entirely, is to invite a review of the journey where the helpers will bring to your cognitive mind certain things that were shared in the journey before you're completely out of journey space, and yet you're not in the rhythm of the journey itself, but you're somewhere in between, and the helpers will do a review with you if you request it and help anchor it in the cognitive mind so that you don't lose it. So, Deb, are you there? There you are.
I am here.
Okay.
My experience with that was pretty intense early on in my process when I started to really commit myself to learning to journey and to developing my relationship with my helpers. I got the guidance that I was to record my journeys and then transcribe them word for word. So I went to Radio Shack and I bought a little cassette recorder and set about for probably a year and a half, journeying 3 and 4 times a week and recording the journeys, and then typing literally word for word everything that I relayed in the recording. And that was an incredibly tedious process, obviously.
Yeah. The way that you were journeying was that you would speak your journey aloud as it happened. I know that most people who have any kind of familiarity with the way that I teach journeying would know that that's understood, but there's a lot of other ways of journeying where people don't speak aloud.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yes, so I was speaking the journey into the recorder, including describing where we were, what I was seeing, what I was feeling, what I was smelling, everything, to get the full sensory experience of the journeys. So what that did was I've actually got probably, I think, 5 huge 3-ring binders now full of journeys, and it's fun to go back and read them, but what that did at the time was take the experience of the journey to a whole different level. I found that I was remembering, experiencing, getting additional insights, having all sorts of ahas happening as I was typing the journeys that I completely missed when I was in journey space actually doing the journey. And it was very rich and a really profound experience. It also really deepened my ability to journey and my interaction with how to deal with my journeys, how to pull the pieces out that are the most important and really know what my helpers were trying to show me. Because certainly journeys can be very rich and it can be overwhelming, just like walking through a forest. You know, what do you really look at? What do you really focus on? And it allowed me to really see that working with my helpers made sure that I didn't miss what they were trying to bring me to see or be aware of.
It was very consuming. Do you happen to remember any of the qualities of why that shift occurred when the helpers recommended that it wasn't necessary to do that so meticulously anymore?
I think, if I remember correctly, and I'll get corrected as I'm talking here, but there was a piece of it that felt a little bit like I paid my dues, and I had demonstrated that I was serious. I felt that energy for sure. The other piece was I think I had trained my mind to recall journeys in a whole different way. And so now I do write down my journeys. I don't, unless I get the guidance, and occasionally that, if the guidance is to record and do word-for-word typing, I would absolutely do it. But now I keep a journal, and I'll write down the key points. And I think what I learned in this process was now I can pick out the key pieces. And so it is a more efficient process. And then I appreciate how the helpers work, because at the time that my guidance was to be typing these things constantly as I was doing them, I had more time. Now my schedule is a little different, and that would be very challenging guidance. And what I hear now is sometimes I even hear don't even write it down.
Mm-hmm. I remember going through a phase very similar to that. It's like the cognitive mind, it's no longer that dichotomy between, quote, the real world and journey space. The two are both valid and a part of your experience of life. And just having key points would bring back the whole journey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree. I would definitely agree. And I also think that at least the way that it's manifested for me to this point is that it's also changed the way that I journey. I think that process of recording and typing and having that very intimate commitment to my journeys has allowed now there'll be a 5-minute here, a 10-minute there throughout a day, and I feel a deeper connection to my helpers all the time now than I did before I committed to that process of that guidance.
Indeed.
And just saying, where is this going to take me?
Well, let me add a couple of things to that. I'll give it just some quick examples. There was an individual, I was facilitating her on a journey, and it was a pretty intense and long journey addressing some important elements in her life. And there was one piece that the helpers recommended that every morning she make a list of things to be grateful about, because she had some struggles with anxiety and apprehension, and it just wasn't in balance, and this would help her stay in balance. But it was sort of in the middle of this hour-long journey. It was maybe a 3-minute comment, but it was so important, and it just revolutionized the way that she went about the day and experienced life. At that time, I was taking notes for her while she was journeying so that it didn't get forgotten or discarded. But it was one of those elements that if a person isn't recalling their journeys as best that they are able and writing some things down, some things can really get missed. It's not that the helpers are incapable of reminding us, but a lot of times if we're not reviewing and reflecting and taking notes, then a lot of the helper's time with us, whatever time we've reserved, can be spent reviewing and reminding us of things of counsel that has been shared with us before, and then, of course, we miss out on forward movement in that process. There's one thing to remember about writing notes, which is start anywhere. Start with the last part of the journey, if that helps, and then just go backwards. Or fill in, or some people do well with getting on the computer. Some people just do much better by writing it down on paper. One of the things to remember about the style of the helpers is that they're not going to overload us. So that if they're going to share many things with us in a journey that is just going to be kind of water over the dam, things that we're just simply not going to remember or we're not going to be able to make use of because we're not either taking notes or reflecting or reviewing. There's some journeys that I will actually keep my notes on my bedside stand so that once a day, morning or night, I might just reread a paragraph or a sentence here and there. And that allows the helpers to be free then as I'm integrating something and applying it and making really good use of it. Then the helpers can move along with some things that are really going to support me in whatever my path is at this time. Otherwise, what we will often find is the helpers will keep journeys fairly short because they know that more than 10 minutes or 15 minutes, we're not going to be able to really keep the value of what's been shared, and sometimes what they're sharing is so important that they're not going to muddy it up with other stuff. And having a note taker, someone who's either facilitating you or else taking your notes yourself afterwards, really makes a difference. I remember one individual who was having a soul retrieval healing, and we were both writing the notes later, just combining our recall. This is a long time ago now. There was one small thing that was put in place, which was it was recommended that she buy a red rubber ball and spend some time every day playing with it. It turned out that that ended up being for her just really one of the most healing and lovely ways for her to nourish the soul part that had come back. And yet it could have gotten lost in the mix if we hadn't been taking notes. I know that the helpers anticipate what we're going to be doing and not doing, but that's part of the communication style is they're just not going to put a lot in a journey if it's either going to overwhelm us or be kind of water over the dam, or we're just going to not be able to recall and implement what's been shared. They'll stick to very key pieces, and the journeys will tend to be very short and just on one topic at a time. And that's fine, but you can encourage a more in-depth journey and more broad journey experience if you commit to taking notes and recalling and reviewing. Okay, I see a question. This is the last four digits is 4111 of the telephone number. Are you there?
Hello.
Hi, Abby.
The question I had is, do helpers ever change their appearance of themselves to help communicate?
Very good question. Yes, sometimes the helpers will change gender. And I have several people that I work with in journeys where I have to try to remember what gender they were last week. But the intention is to demonstrate a particular energy. The helpers are not physical; they're spirit. So what they're demonstrating, like in this case, it was a power animal would sometimes in the middle of a journey would switch from referring to him as a he to she as a she. But there was a shift because gender often demonstrates just a particular different quality, one over the other, so that there'll be that kind of a shift. The helpers will often, if it's a two-legged helper, sometimes they will demonstrate a larger beingness about them, because that's important for the issue that we're going to be addressing. Sometimes they'll even shift. I love it when the helpers will grow a beard. Sometimes a helper will demonstrate growing a beard and stroking the beard to just demonstrate, think on these things. Let's ponder this. Something to reflect on. Sometimes they will magically appear with a watch to demonstrate that time is important. There have been occasions when there's been a two-legged helper who carries the medicine of a four-legged helper, and sometimes they will come in four-legged form, sometimes in their two-legged form, and you never really quite know how they're going to appear in vision, but it's the same helper, without a doubt. It's always about what's most helpful at this given time. And that's probably the key thing to keep remembering, is that whenever anything occurs with our experience with the helpers, with how either they're communicating themselves to us or communicating an issue to us, it always has to do with what's going to best help us. And if we can keep that in mind, then we don't get too tangled up with getting a little disoriented by what types of shifts and changes might be occurring. We can stay pretty steady on the core realization that whatever is going on right now is going to be the best help for us, the best container or expression or avenue. And when we stay keyed on that, then a lot of the different things that the helpers will do, either demonstrate or shift visages or anything like that, then that helps us get a quicker and more consistent grasp as to why this is occurring. And we don't get too fussy about what is occurring, but we have a better feel for being able to get a bead on it, that this is occurring because the helpers realize this particular approach or demeanor or energy or visage is the best help for us at this time. Okay, did that help, Abby?
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Let's go to the word imaginating that I put in the description of the class. This is a little tricky ground, but it's something for those who tend to be too passive in journeying. Sometimes it just takes us a while to really get the hang of how the helpers want to interact with us, which is that they're not forceful, domineering, or overbearing. They're not going to arm wrestle with us or anything like that. And at the same time, there is a need for engagement on our part, where one of the ways that the helpers describe this is having momentum is kind of like putting a motor on a boat, and at the same time allowing the helpers to steer the tiller as far as where we're going and how to best get to a place that's going to be the most helpful to us at this time. So, for example, if we're asking about a situation that's very distressing or confusing to us, allowing the helpers to have the tiller, they might approach that particular issue in a way that we normally wouldn't. And it might even seem like they're not addressing the issue. I used a metaphor last time that if a person is having trouble with a neighbor, for example, and wanting some guidance or some counsel about how to deal with that situation, but the helpers really know that that's not going to be particularly helpful, what they really want to address is maybe we might be easily intimidated, and want to help us with something within our tendency or a propensity that is really at the core of what's affecting that situation. And they actually are addressing the issue, but not in the way that we would. So we kind of hand them the tiller. But momentum does matter as far as not just standing there passively and waiting for something to occur. And that's where I use the word imaginating, where there's a lot of ways in which that comes in handy. Maybe we've had a really hectic, pressure-filled week, and now we've set aside some time for engagement with the helpers. Maybe we've even done some preparation, but we're still just kind of overloaded, still have some of that stress. Then that's where we can begin to envision. We can envision the warmth and the care and the energy of our helper. We can remember that, bring it to mind. Or if there's a particular place that we tend to meet the helpers in the energetic realm, like a beach or a particular tree or something like that, we can envision our energy going into that particular arena, knowing that this is a good place to meet with the helpers. And as we're envisioning something, then it begins to deepen and take hold and become a solid, authentic experience. Sometimes that really helps get us to the same place that the helpers are. If we're just kind of standing there in our internal energy, waiting for something to happen, there might be a lot of reasons why nothing is really unfolding then, and we need to have a little bit more momentum in our own energy to forge that connection and stimulate the journey experience, I find that it's really not difficult to know when things have shifted from envisioning something into a full formal journey. It's really not difficult. It sounds difficult, but it really isn't. Okay. The helper's tendency in their communication style is always to offer perspective far more than do this, don't do that. They want to round out the full picture. So one of the best questions that we can ask is, what am I overlooking? What am I not seeing? Now we're talking the helper's language. And that's really good whenever we're addressing any problem, because often what we think is the problem really isn't. There was one individual I recall who was looking at quitting her job because she had an hour-and-a-half commute every day, and trying to address that with the helpers, but the helpers went into an entirely different direction in answer to the question, what am I missing or overlooking? And where they really wanted to go was to highlight to her that the whole experience at her work was so incredibly negative. The boss, the coworkers, how they treated her and how they looked down on her was deflating her spirit, wilting her wings, and the commute really wasn't centerpiece. It was that, yes, indeed, it was a good idea to find a different job, and it was because of the work environment. And once that was fleshed out to her, then the decision was made, because that was so clear, and of course it was so true. And that is often what will happen, is that we will often be asking for guidance, but when the helpers paint a picture for us, a perspective, give us the whole picture, usually there's no guidance needed by that time. Usually we see things pretty clearly, and we have the wherewithal to be able to make a good decision in the light of what they've shared. So if we find ourselves kind of knocking on the door to the helpers, asking them what we should do, and the helpers are painting a picture instead, it's really good to relax and let that take full form, because that seems to be the helper's preferred way of addressing things. Okay. I'm just going to quickly go over some other things. When the helpers won't answer your question, that might be an important one. Often it's when we're not neutral and when we're not asking appropriately. What am I missing? What am I not seeing is always a good way to address anything. Sometimes the question that we're asking, there's so many complex parts to it that the helpers really can't address it in one journey or in the last 5 minutes of a journey. Sometimes it's because we don't really need help with that matter. The helpers will never treat us as children. They'll help us when we need help, but they're not going to create a setting where we're being treated as children and we become dependent. So they will always address anything with us based on the abilities and capabilities that we have. They'll highlight and support those, and then they will add anything to the mix that we are not able to see or grasp on our own. So sometimes we can be asking questions where we really don't need help with that particular question, so the helpers will just simply not be responding to the question because we actually really already know what the best way to go is. Sometimes they won't answer questions because timing is really important, and we're not open to the idea that the answer might be yes, but not this year. That's a really good plan, but not until next month, or that sort of a thing. So the gray areas, sometimes we're not open. We're expecting real clear black and white, concrete responses from the helpers. And if we can be really open, what the helpers prefer, they prefer to paint a full picture with all of the gray areas and with all of the delicate pieces being in place. If we can just hang in there and allow them to do that and not try to force things into clear black and white responses. Okay. I asked some people to share with me what has surprised them about the helpers, knowing that everybody's experience is different, and all of this is useful to hear. One person wrote that the most surprising thing is that the process is actually a two-way conversation, and that the guidance is very specific and tailored to the unique needs. She says, I spent my life feeling like the doors to heaven were closed to human knowing, and the only guidance one could receive was momentary, partial, and murky. And to have extended conversations very directly and specifically, and to feel fully met by another, meaning a spirit helper, is a tremendous gift. The next most surprising thing was that the helper's main mission, at least for her, seems to be able to help her enjoy life, and that for her, joy is a first step. And she also noticed that their humor is very different from hers. She also commented how rigorous the helper is about not communicating unless they start from an open, neutral mindset. And another person wrote that it's always a surprise, the connection itself. It's like the warmth of the sun. And she also says that, just like Deb said, that it's a surprise. It seems like you never can tell what's going to happen each time. That is one of the things that I think the helpers really enjoy, is having the freedom to be able to interact with us in a whole variety of ways that can be vastly different each time. One week it can be verbally, the next week it can be visually, the next week can be a healing, the next can be talking about the deepest principles of life, and the next week about something very, very pragmatic, like how to make sure we're getting enough sleep at night. Okay. So I think that that's probably the best that we can do today, even though I have a lot more here, but we'll have to wait for another time. And before I say farewell, once again, I'll see if anyone else has a question.
Hi, Chris. This is Jenny.
Hi, Jenny.
Hi. I'm just new to this, so when I enter, I often kind of metamorphose into a seal every time I go in, and I wondered if there was a symbolic reason why that often happens.
Do you have a communication connection with the primary helper? If you have a communication with your helper, we'll always ask them first, what's the significance of this? But if that's not in place yet, then what I could think that would be the value of that is that it puts you in a whole different demeanor, doesn't it? I might guess that maybe your regular life tends to be pretty systematic. Got to do this, got to do that, got to do this. Mm-hmm. And that shape-shifting into a seal in your spirit energy helps you move away from that more constrictive type of energetic demeanor into being able more, I guess I would call it going with the flow. It probably also is a good balance. That's probably one of the main reasons that's occurring.
Yeah. I was wondering if that is part of the process.
I would guess that it's either your higher self or your helpers are arranging it so that you can be in a different energetic style. And
okay, that's really helpful.
Yeah, and being a seal, or at least experiencing the dynamic of that energy, helps you shake off more of the structured rigidity of normal life, and it's probably a real helpful healing experience for you, a real good balance, as well as probably providing you with a little bit more being at ease with the journey flow.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you. Okay. A whole lot of topics that we weren't able to cover today. How to go where the helpers are and not go where they aren't. Maybe just fairly succinctly, a lot of that really has to do with understanding the communication culture of the helpers. That if we're heading into a direction where we're swamped in the problem, then we're going where the helpers aren't. The helpers are about helping and assisting and healing and providing us with the support and the clarity for forward movement. And if we're finding ourselves really preoccupied with our problem so that we're spending 15 minutes describing our problem, that's not where the helpers are. They can't go there. Their style of interaction with us and being with us is much more about healing and forward momentum. It's far less about navigating the terrain energetically, like a map, and far more about recognizing where the helper's core energy is and trying to get on the same page as them and being open to an interaction with them that is very, very natural to them. And that energetic quality that we hold, where we're seeking assistance, but we're not seeking someone to tell us what to do all the time, where we might be seeking growth, but we're not getting lost in the problems and the stuff that has created issues for us, because the helpers are much more about support and healing and forward movement. And if we're asking for information about somebody else just because we want to understand them, the helpers generally won't meet us there because they honor privacy. And they're not going to share something about another person with us unless it's directed towards us and how we're functioning in the relationship. So it's a lot less about a map in terms of an energetic terrain and much more about being in sync with the intention and the value system and the demeanor of the helpers, which is support and growth and sometimes nourishing and healing and understanding. Okay. I think that I'll go ahead and say farewell. Many blessings on all of you, and I look forward to the next time.